You tried not to think about it. You told yourself faith means trust, not questions. But the thought didn't go away. It kept returning, quietly, at night, when everything else was silent. What if this isn't true? And the strange part is, the more you tried to push that question away, the stronger it became. Because belief has a hidden rule. The more fragile it is, the more it demands protection. But here's the unsettling truth. The most dangerous question you can ask religion isn't about God. It's about why you believe at all. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The question you're not supposed to ask. Every belief system has rules. Some are written, clearly stated, repeated in rituals and teachings. Others are unspoken, quietly understood, enforced without ever being named. And among all of them, one rule stands above the rest. Do not question the foundation. You are allowed to explore details. You can ask how something works, when it happened, what it means in daily life. These questions feel safe. They stay within the boundaries. They never threaten the structure itself. But the moment you ask why this is true, something shifts. The tone changes. The room feels different. Conversations that once felt open suddenly become tense, guarded, uncertain. People may not even realize what is happening. They just feel it. A subtle discomfort, a need to defend. Sometimes it turns into irritation, sometimes into silence, sometimes into anger that seems disproportionate to the question itself. And maybe you have felt that reaction before, not just from others, but within yourself, a hesitation, a quiet voice saying this question goes too far. The moment you start questioning, everything changes. Because now, you are no longer inside the belief, moving along with it, accepting its assumptions without noticing them. You step back, even if only slightly. And from that distance, something new appears. You begin to see the structure itself, the patterns, the boundaries, the invisible lines you were never supposed to cross. And once you see that, even briefly, the belief is no longer just something you follow. It becomes something you can examine. And that is where things begin to break. Doubt isn't the problem. You were probably taught something like this. Doubt is weakness. Doubt is dangerous. Doubt leads you away from truth. It sounds convincing, especially when you hear it repeated over and over, reinforced by authority, by tradition, by people you trust. So you learn to suppress it, to treat doubt like a flaw that needs to be corrected, something to feel guilty about, something to hide, even from yourself. But think about it for a moment. If something is actually true, it does not need protection from questions. Truth does not become weaker when examined. It does not collapse under pressure. If anything, it becomes clearer, stronger, more stable. So why is doubt treated like a threat? If a belief falls apart the moment you look at it closely, was it ever solid to begin with, or was it only held together by the absence of scrutiny? Here is where the paradox begins to reveal itself. The beliefs that are defended the most aggressively are often the ones that feel the most fragile underneath. Not fragile in appearance, but fragile in what they rely on to survive. Because the issue is not always whether something is true, the issue is what happens if it stops feeling true. Entire identities can be built on belief. Relationships, communities, a sense of purpose, even a sense of safety. When doubt enters, it does not just question an idea. It threatens everything connected to it. So, doubt becomes the enemy, not because it destroys truth, but because it exposes dependency. And once you see that, something unsettling starts to emerge. Maybe doubt was never the problem at all. Belief as emotional survival. Imagine belief like a safety net. Not something you carefully chose after deep reflection, but something you simply fell into before you even knew you were falling. It was already there, waiting, surrounding you from the very beginning. As a child, belief was never presented as an option. It did not feel like a theory or a perspective. It felt like reality itself. It was the environment you grew up in, the air you breathed, the language through which everything was explained and understood. It told you what happens after death, giving shape to the unknown. It told you what is right and wrong, creating a clear sense of order. It told you who you are, placing you inside a larger story that already had meaning. And without it, there would have been uncertainty, a kind of open space with no clear answers. The human mind does not handle that space easily. It looks for patterns, for certainty, for something stable to hold on to. So, belief slowly becomes more than just an idea. It becomes something deeper, something tied to emotional stability. It becomes a form of psychological survival, a way to feel grounded in a world that would otherwise feel unpredictable. This is why letting go does not feel like simply changing your mind. It feels like losing something essential, like stepping away from solid ground. Belief works almost like quicksand. The more you struggle against it, the more resistance you feel. The more you try to pull away, the more it seems to pull you back in. And yet, even this does not fully explain why people hold on so tightly. Because the real reason goes even deeper. The hidden fear behind faith. The real fear is not that religion might be wrong. That idea alone is uncomfortable, but it is not what truly shakes people. The deeper fear is what follows if that possibility turns out to be true. Because belief is rarely isolated. It does not sit alone as a single idea that can be removed without consequence. It supports an entire structure built over years, sometimes over a lifetime. Meaning begins to depend on it. Identity forms around it. Purpose is defined through it. Community is held together by it. These are not small things that can be easily replaced or ignored. So, when you begin to question belief, you are not just examining a concept. You are touching everything connected to it. Every assumption, every explanation, every sense of certainty that once felt stable. Think about that carefully. It is not just a belief you are questioning. It is the framework through which you have understood reality itself, the lens that shaped how you interpret life, death, morality, and your place in the world. And the moment you start questioning, everything changes. The ground that once felt solid begins to feel uncertain. What once seemed obvious now requires examination. Because now you are no longer asking a simple question like, is this true? That question, on its own, can still be managed. Instead, a deeper question emerges, one that is much harder to ignore. Who am I without this? Without the belief, without the structure, without the identity it helped create. That question does not just challenge ideas, it challenges the self. And that is why it feels far more dangerous than anything that came before. Social reinforcement. Belief does not exist in isolation. It is not something you hold entirely on your own, separate from the world around you. It is reinforced constantly, in ways that are often invisible while you are inside it. It comes through family first. The people you trust most introduce you to what is considered true, long before you have the ability to question it. Their certainty becomes your certainty, not because you examined it, but because it feels safe to accept it. Then culture takes over. Traditions, rituals, shared language, repeated stories. They surround you, shaping what feels normal. When something is repeated enough times, it stops sounding like a belief and starts sounding like a fact. And repetition is powerful. The same ideas, heard again and again, create familiarity. Familiarity creates comfort, and comfort begins to feel like truth. So when everyone around you believes something, questioning it does not feel like a simple intellectual exercise. It feels like stepping outside the group, like separating yourself from the people who shaped you. And that is where the tension begins. Because now it is no longer just about the idea. It becomes about loyalty, about belonging, about whether you are still part of the same shared reality. Questioning starts to feel like betrayal, not only of the belief itself, but of the people connected to it, family, friends, community. The ones who may see your doubt not as curiosity, but as rejection. So the system protects itself in a very subtle way. It does not always argue through logic. It does not always need to. Instead, it relies on something deeper. Belonging. The fear of being isolated can be stronger than the desire to know what is true. Losing belief can feel like losing connection, like stepping into a space where you no longer fully fit anywhere. And that is what keeps many people from asking the deeper questions. But this pattern, this mechanism of reinforcement and protection, did not begin with religion, the historical pattern. Throughout history, belief systems have followed the same pattern. This is not limited to religion. You can see it in empires, in political ideologies, even in entire cultures that define how people think and behave. Each of them builds a narrative, a story about how the world works, who holds authority, what is right, what must never be challenged. At first, these narratives create order. They give people direction, stability, a shared understanding of reality. But over time, something else happens. The narrative becomes protected. Not just respected, but guarded. Certain questions become uncomfortable. Certain ideas are pushed to the edges. And slowly, an invisible boundary forms around what is acceptable to think and say. Because once people begin asking deeper questions, control starts to weaken, not always dramatically, but gradually. One question leads to another, one doubt opens the door to more. And systems built on certainty cannot easily survive that process. So, they adapt in a subtle way. They do not always silence questions directly. That would be too obvious, too forceful. Instead, they shape the environment so that people silence themselves. A person begins to hesitate before speaking. They question whether it is safe to ask. They feel the weight of potential consequences, even if those consequences are never clearly stated. And that is the real mechanism at work. Not suppression in its obvious form, but something quieter. Self-censorship that feels like a personal choice, even though it was shaped by the system itself. Over time, people stop asking not because they cannot, but because they feel they should not. And once that happens, the system no longer needs to defend itself openly. But this leads to a deeper and far more uncomfortable question. The question religion cannot answer. Here it is. The question that sits underneath everything, quiet but persistent, waiting to be noticed. Why do you believe what you believe? Not the surface explanation, not what you were taught to say, not what feels familiar or comforting, but the deeper reason that rarely gets examined. Why? Did you arrive at your belief through independent thought, careful reasoning, and personal discovery? Or did it take shape long before you were capable of questioning it? Think about how early it began. The ideas you absorbed before you had the language to challenge them. The certainty that formed before you understood what certainty even was. And now consider this. If you had been born somewhere else, into a different culture, a different family, a different tradition, would you hold a completely different belief with the same level of confidence? Would it feel just as obvious, just as true, just as unquestionable? That possibility is difficult to sit with because it suggests that belief may not be as personal or as chosen as it feels. This question has no easy answer, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous. It removes the comfort of simple explanations and replaces it with uncertainty. Because once you follow it far enough, it leads you to something uncomfortable. Belief might not be rooted in objective truth as much as it is rooted in conditioning, in repetition, environment, and early influence shaping what feels real. And once you begin to see that clearly, even for a moment, something shifts. The certainty that once felt solid starts to loosen. And the moment you start questioning, everything changes. The moment of realization. There is a moment that does not look dramatic from the outside. No sudden breakthrough, no clear turning point. It is quiet, almost invisible, but something shifts beneath the surface. You stop defending automatically. You notice that impulse to argue, to protect, to justify, and for the first time, you pause instead of reacting. That pause changes everything. Because in that space, you begin to observe. You start noticing patterns that were always there but never fully seen. The repetition of the same ideas, the way certain phrases trigger emotional responses, the subtle discomfort that appears when specific questions are asked. It becomes less about what is being said and more about how it is being reinforced. Slowly, belief begins to look different, not like an unshakable truth, but like a system, something structured, repeated, maintained through habit and emotion as much as through logic. And the moment you start questioning, everything changes. Not in a loud or chaotic way, but in a quiet shift of perspective that cannot be reversed. Because now, you are no longer fully inside it. You are not just participating without awareness. You are seeing it from a distance, even if that distance is small. It is like stepping outside of something you once thought was the entire world. And here is the part that feels almost unsettling. Nothing physically changed. The system is still there. The beliefs are still being repeated. The people around you may not notice anything different. But your position has changed. You are no longer inside the cage. You are looking at it. And once you see it that way, one realization becomes impossible to ignore. The door was never locked. What comes after? This is where most people hesitate. Not at the beginning, not when the first question appears, but here, at the edge of something unfamiliar. Because stepping outside belief does not immediately give you answers. It does not replace certainty with a new, stable structure. Instead, it introduces something many people try to avoid: uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel deeply uncomfortable. It removes the clear lines, the ready-made explanations, the sense that everything has a defined place and purpose. For a while, it can feel like standing without support. But there is something else hidden inside that discomfort. Freedom. Not the kind that feels loud or dramatic, but a quieter form. The freedom to explore without being pulled back. The freedom to question without guilt. The freedom to think without fear of crossing invisible boundaries. For the first time, you are not limited to what you were given. You are no longer required to accept conclusions before examining them. You can begin to build your understanding slowly, carefully, based on what you can genuinely observe and reason through. This process is not instant. It takes time to replace borrowed certainty with personal clarity. There will be moments of doubt, moments where the old framework feels easier, more familiar. But something has already changed. You are no longer relying on what you were told to be true. You are starting to see for yourself. And that shift, even if it feels uncertain, carries a different kind of stability. One that is not imposed from the outside, but formed from within. Because now your understanding is no longer inherited. It is constructed, piece by piece, through honest inquiry. And as that process unfolds, it leads to one final realization, one that reframes everything that came before. The real question was never about religion. Not at its core. It was always about something deeper, something more human. Why we need belief in the first place. Because belief offers certainty, and certainty feels safe. It gives structure to the unknown, a sense that everything is under control. But truth does not always offer that comfort. Truth can feel uncertain, open, even unsettling. And that is the difference. If you have ever questioned what you were taught, it does not mean something is wrong with you. It means something is working. You are engaging with reality instead of avoiding it. You are thinking. And the moment you stop fearing questions, something begins to shift. You do not lose meaning. You begin to create it, carefully, honestly, on your own terms. So maybe the most dangerous question is also the most necessary one. Not because it destroys belief, but because it reveals your ability to go beyond it.